Hey, what's going on, everybody? Had a couple of questions about the Aaron Rodgers contract, since the Jets are going to have a decision coming up on that next year, and we're getting pretty close to the end of the regular season. So I thought I'd try to put together a video going over some of the ins and outs in Aaron Rodgers' contract. So let's go over just a little bit of that right now. So what you're going to see on the screen here is what was the basic structure of Aaron Rodgers' contract that he signed. 2023 and 2024 obviously already done. So what we're looking at is 2025 onward. So basically what you have here with Aaron Rodgers is he was paid a $35 million bonus in 2023. That was prorated at $7 million a year from 2023 to 2027. He had an option bonus that was paid this past season at $35 million as well. That is prorated from 2024 to 2028. If he was to be on the roster in 2025, the Jets would have a decision to make on another option, which would also prorate at $7 million a year. At the moment, the only numbers that are a factor in the dead money calculation are these numbers in red. So if Rodgers was to be a regular release, meaning the Jets just say, okay, we're going in there for a rebuild, let's just take him off the roster and start over, you're looking at $49 million in dead money for the year 2025. It would be the sum of all of this. There'd be nothing left on the books in 2026 or obviously in 2027 as well. If they go for the post June 1 release, that would be a little bit different. I believe they would take a dead money hit of $21 million. The league, I can never find any consistency with the league on this. I'm sure there's something that I just don't know about. But a lot of times, what they do is they will count this option bonus, even though it wasn't exercised, unless the Jets actually, I think, renounce the option. And they can do that. There's just some other technical things that come into play if you do that. So I think it would be $21 million in dead money, and then you'd have $35 million in dead money in 2026. But the Jets would get a $7 million credit from this $21 million because this $7 million here was never paid. So again, the net total is still going to be $49 million, and your split is going to be 21 and 35. And really, it's going to be $21 million that you're taking in 2025. And in 2026, the net impact on that is $28 million. You can argue as to which one of these would make more sense for the Jets. It would really depend, I think, on a new general manager coming in, and if they just want it completely off the book, so you don't have that reminder, versus the other option where they might look at this and say, this is better. It gives us more options with our salary cap. If we carry him there, where the net impact is probably going to be 28, that we can carry him there and make it work that way. Now, what happens if you want to keep Aaron Rodgers in 2025? So the next option is you're going to look at keeping him in 2025 to where you keep the contract as is. I think that's option number one that you're looking at. So 2025 now becomes an active roster charge. So you can see that's going to be a $23.5 million salary cap charge for this year. So that's very similar to the post June 1 release option where we're looking at 21. Here we're looking at 23.5, and you keep him on the roster. However, you are paying out $37.5 million in cash because you're going to pay a $35 million bonus. So that's going to get prorated over 5 years. Now, your dead money that's involved for the future now shifts down to 2026, and that's all these red figures that you see here on the screen. Those are all the numbers that you have to take into account for dead money. So now you're looking at a regular release come 2026. You'd be looking at $63 million in dead money because of all this money that you're deferring from his salary this year that gets added to it. So you'd be looking at 21 million from this year, 21 million from this year, and then another 21 million that would be across these 2 years. So your total investment on Aaron Rodgers in that case, to have him the one more season, would be $86.5 million in cap charges versus, pulling that Band-Aid off and having the $49 million in cap charges. Now, if you go to the post June 1 release, here you'd be able to split your money at 21 million dead in 2026 and then 42 million dead in 2027. Now, the question there that you have to ask is, would Aaron Rodgers be willing to renegotiate his contract to allow that to happen? So right now, Aaron Rodgers has what I consider four effective void years in the contract. You can see there's years for 26, 27, 28, and 29 that have a base salary of $20 million. Rodgers is a little bit of a unique individual. He did this with Green Bay as well, where it was almost like he wanted these years in there with artificially low salaries to basically say, no, fake news. I'm not the highest paid player in NFL history. It's not the biggest contract that you've ever seen. It's not the highest annual value that you've ever seen for a player. Um, he's the only player in the league that's really done that. Everybody else wants their contract inflated to a level that's not even realistic to say they're the highest paid player in the league. He's kind of gone in the opposite direction. And this actually accomplished that as well. Normally when we looked at his deal, it was reported everywhere, and we look at it this way too. These three front years at 37.5 million are the real, numbers there. But from a technical standpoint, because these are not officially void years, you'd be looking at a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year contract here. So you're looking at a deal where he can say, well, I'm making $27.5 million a year. So be that as it may, whatever the logic is in that, I don't really know. However, the one aspect of it that I think was creative by his side, not so much by the Jets, is that where you've got this $20 million base salary, it doesn't allow you to just post June 1 him. If you actually post June 1 him, his 2026 dead during free agency would be $41 million. It would then drop to 21. So this post June 1 release is what the cap numbers would look like on June 2nd, not what they would look like during free agency. The 2025 one, where we're looking at that, it's pretty similar because his base is so low. His cap charge would be 23.5 million that you'd be carrying during free agency. Then it drops to 21 or 14 if they don't include that option in there. It's basically the same. So here, the Jets would have to go in and say, look, we need to make these actual void years, or put in the retirement clause years, or we need to do some type of mechanism in here, whether it's another option, whatever it is. You need to do something that brings this paragraph 5, this base salary, down to like another 2.5 million. So it would be a $23.5 million charge that you would be carrying during free agency. Now, that's a very easy thing to do if Rodgers retires, because if he retires and he's not going to play, you simply bring his salary down to the minimum and you put him on the retirement list after June 1st. But here we're just kind of looking at releases. The cap charges that you see on the screen here and in the 2025 as well, and really any of these numbers are the same whether he retires or not. Whether he's retired or he's released from the contract. So, you'd be looking at these kind of numbers here. So I think you would be looking to redo his deal sometime in 2025, just to say, look, this is a 1-year thing. Let's get this contract structured in a way to where we can release you as a June 1. If things go great, we can work out something to renegotiate, because let's be honest, Aaron Rodgers is not going to play for $20 million in 2026 if he's coming back. There's no reason I think that he would play for that amount of money to do that. So it's just a thing that you have to consider when you're looking at those future cap charges, that it is going to require some type of work with Rodgers on a modification so they could utilize this post June 1 release. And looking at these numbers here, I think that's, if you were going to keep him, that's the way that you'd be doing this. You'd go 23.5, 21, and 42 rather than do the 23.5 and 63, because now you really need to turn the page and start rebuilding. And I think at that point you need to have money to spend on your team elsewhere. Now, the secondary option that they could have if they wanted to keep him in option 2, which would actually be to renounce that option. So if they did that, it would remove the 2029 year from the contract. So you can see that just kind of vanished here. Could have just deleted this whole column, but I just turned it into a $0 proration. So what you would be doing here is this bonus that was 35 million would now become base salary at 37.5. Renounce it, decline it, whatever you want to do. I think they'd have to renounce it. I think if they decline it, you would actually have the $7 million charge stick in there, and then you would get a credit the following year. I don't see the point in doing that. So you would actually take it out and just put his base salary at 37.5. Here you would get to a $51.5 million cap charge. So it would be very similar to the option of cutting him completely in 2025, is that you would take all that money right off the bat here. What that does for you is it clears the books for you in the future. Now, again, post June 1 would also require that renegotiation to where we would be bringing this 2026 salary down to that 2.5 million, or whatever that number would be. But it would leave you with $35 million dead in 2026 on a regular cut. That's all these numbers here. If they go with the post June 1, it's the 14 million in 2026 and the 21 that's remaining in 2027. I would think that's a good option too. If you're going to keep him on the roster, this might be a unique way to do it. The only thing is, I kind of feel like if Rodgers is going to come back, not that he really has a say in it. He will in this next scenario where we talk about a pay cut, but you almost feel like Rodgers is going to kind of want you to go all in on the season, and sticking him at a 51.5 cap charge might not do that. So he might not be as agreeable to do some things with these future salaries to allow him to June 1 if the Jets were to go this route. So I think you'd have to have a discussion with him about ways the Jets would anticipate being able to spend on the roster to have an improved team next year versus what they have this year. The final scenario, which a couple people asked me about, was, well, how could you do a pay cut? So I guess what I would say is, would Rodgers, or why would Rodgers agree to a pay cut? And what would that number be? There's not a lot of history that we have where we can go back and say, all right, here's a player, obviously a declining player, but was willing to take a pay cut. Going back in time, you had Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning dropped his salary from $19 million to $15 million in the year the Broncos won the Super Bowl. Now, there's some differences. The Broncos have never been a heavy spending organization. The Jets have gone all over the place with their spending. So, that's one of the things. I think that because of Peyton Manning's decline, it was kind of clear that Manning was, in theory, one of the factors that was potentially holding back the Denver Broncos. I don't think you look at Aaron Rodgers right now and say Aaron Rodgers is the only reason the Jets are not going to a Super Bowl. I would not say that he is holding them back. He's declining, but I would not say he's holding them back significantly because of how he's played, right? The whole defense has fallen apart. The running game has been non-existent. So I don't think you'd be looking at it that way. So I'm not really even sure if you would have kind of the same situation that's there. But anyway, I just kind of factored in like, okay, if we follow that same model, we're looking kind of at salary that's a double from there. So let's say he would take $8 million off. So I just reduced his bonus payment by $8 million. There's a lot of different ways they could do this. But again, if you're convincing him to take a pay cut and you haven't been a good football team and you've got a lot of holes in your team, you have to be going in there with the kind of the concept that you are going to be able to, improve from last year. And you have to say that we need this $8 million to spend on other players. And that doesn't mean spending on Garrett Wilson, to keep him in the fold. It means to bring somebody in from the outside that's going to fix the defense, right? That's the kind of stuff that you'd be looking at. So that to me is a pretty big sales job that you have to do. Now, he did take a pay cut to go from Green Bay to New York. That was about a 12.5 pay cut. So, I mean, you could drop that down a little bit more if you wanted to take a couple million more off it. Let's say we drop this bonus down to 22. We drop his cap charge next year to 20.9. You'd be looking at either 52.6 in dead money in 2026, or 18.4 and 34.2. And again, possibilities that you would come up with some kind of deal where maybe if he does take this pay cut, you do one of these deals and you keep your fingers crossed for the way things go. This is typical for veterans. Let's say you made him do a pay cut there and he brings his salary down to 24.5. You might do something to where the next year you give him a salary of $27 million and you guarantee it right now. You might do something like that. Um, there's some different things that you could do, and that would obviously completely change what this dead money would look like, because now you're creating a scenario where he's going to be on the roster if he feels like playing football. Um, but I think that's the number I had in there, right? 27. I had 27. I if I could type this in right, I think this is probably a more likely scenario that he would drop his salary down to about 30 million on the year, 29.5. You'd be looking at 21.9 cap charge, 19.4, and 37.2 for a total of 78.5. For ways they can do that. Now, there's also some other things. If you're looking at the quarterback situation in a vacuum, so you come back here and you say, well, okay, we've got this $49 million, or we can keep him and we're adding 37.5 million to the total that we're going to take in these next 3 years. You also have to ask yourself, if you're the Jets, what is your alternative if Rodgers is not your quarterback? Are you going to go? I don't believe Tyrod Taylor would be the solution at quarterback. He may have his guarantee on some of his salary next year. I don't have that up in front of me. But would you be going in and just grabbing random journeymen to plug in there, making the minimum? I don't think a rookie plays into account. The draft is supposedly not very strong this year. But whatever they have for him, for Rodgers, whatever decision they make should have no impact on whether or not they draft a player. If they draft a player, it should be independent of whether or not Rodgers is on the football team. So, I think you'd be looking at this. Do the Jets envision this as being a competitive scenario where you're looking at it's a weak free agent class, but you'd be looking at like Jameis Winston, Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, maybe Russell Wilson. I would imagine that your payouts on these players would be about $10 million. So, maybe a little bit less. So your net number here is really not going to be this 37.5 extra that you're paying for Rodgers. It's going to be the 37.5 minus, there's a formula in there, minus, whatever you pay for a quarterback. Let's call it $8 million, for a guy with some potential. So your net on this, I don't know why that number is sticking every time I seem to type it in. Your net that you'd be looking at on this is probably about 29.5 million, somewhere in that, rather than the 37.5. So that's one of the ways that I would look at this. If you were planning on working with a veteran quarterback that was going to cost the team a little bit of money, versus just playing for a couple of $1 million. And I don't think the Jets want to trot out, the Tim Boyle route, where that would be the alternative scenario. Likewise, you also have to factor in the Rodgers tax that comes with it. Rodgers tax means that you are going to bring in some players that Rodgers is interested in. I would say the primary one is you're going to be keeping Devontae Adams. Assume that cost is going to be about $20 million, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But I would guess that would be a scenario where maybe he would take a pay cut. If you said, well, we can keep Adams if you drop your salary a little bit, that's a whole different story that you're working out. But that is also something that you have to take into account when you're making that Rodgers decision. What's the collateral damage? Is it just the quarterback we're talking about in the vacuum where it's a 29.5 charge? Or does the Adams decision completely go along with it to where you are in a scenario one, free and clear of Adams? Scenario two, you're paying $20 million for him, to make Aaron Rodgers happy. So those are all kind of the side factors that you have to take into account when you're making this decision. But these are the hard numbers that you're looking at. So, 49 million dead in some way, shape, or form if you're going to be moving on from him next year. If you're not going to be moving on from him next year, it's going to be somewhere in the ballpark of $37.5 million to keep him. And then all of the dead money that you're going to have remaining on the deal to bring the total 3-year investment to $86.5 million on the cap, but having him for one additional season. So it's 49 and nothing, 86 and 5 for one. Or, if you can do the whole pay cut deal, 78.5 versus 49 for that 1 year, and then you can factor in those other numbers that I mentioned about the alternatives at quarterback or the Devonte Adams kind of stuff that might go along with it, and see how that would impact your thought process. So anyway, that hopefully explains something about the Rodgers contract. If you have any questions, you can post them in the comments here. You can always email me, jason@overthecap.com, or you can get in touch with me on X or Blue Sky. I'm sure you guys, if you found me here, you're following me there. All right. I'll talk to everybody again sometime soon.